Hello, I'm Omar Sallam and this is the Product Live. Did you know that imagining as event has already occurred and you're dealing with the circumstances increases the ability to correctly identify risks and to imagine future outcomes by 30%? We have with us Alba Simon, Senior Product Manager from Adidas. Welcome, Alba, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Omar. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to spend, the next half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour even, talking about the pre-mortem exercise with you guys. I'm Alba Simon. I'm currently a senior product manager at Adidas, and I do digital product management. So I help consumers find the right product for them online. And I'd like to share with you a technique that is one of my favorites that I've recently rediscovered, because actually I wasn't always a product manager. I started my career as a project manager. And back in the day, I learned a lot of things by the book, a lot of frameworks, methodologies, that I didn't realize how transferable some of those skills and techniques are until I landed in product management. So the pre-mortem is one of those exercises that is actually very common and frequent and well known in the project management world. But when I moved into product management, I was speaking with some colleagues, and it's not a technique that's very well known. So I think this is a great opportunity to raise awareness for it and to share this best practice.
It's definitely, as you said, one of the techniques that are not really well known. Maybe it gets overseen when you're in the discovery or the planning phase of your product. So, and it's really interesting that you actually learned that and developed your own technique or how to adopt that through your own experience. And that's what it's all about with our podcast, that we try to discuss actual actionable practices that have been tried, not just discussing the theory and so on. So like, if you could start with defining like what is pre-mortem. Like, this also terminology is not very commonly used, so like to define what is pre-mortem, that would be a good starting point.
Yes, absolutely. So a pre-mortem, as much as it may sound like a Halloween party or bringing back zombies to life, it's nothing like that, really. A pre-mortem exercise is a very simple exercise where a team comes together and brainstorms about anything that could possibly go wrong with your next product launch or iteration or project. It often gets confused or mixed up with the post-mortem, which is actually a retrospective, but it is very similar to risk planning. So it's not something, completely new. I'm sure all product managers, have a way of doing it to some extent. But the pre-mortem has a whole framework behind it that we can go into details in a second.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Please, explain us a little bit more about this framework.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So before I go into the framework, I just want to highlight a little bit the benefits of it. So the pre-mortem exercise, I think, has three main benefits, really. So I think that the power of it really is turning that hindsight into foresight, because, we all know that saying that hindsight is a wonderful thing. But really what you're going to take away from this is learnings from the past to be able to implement them into your next iteration. It also helps a lot with preventing biases and groupthink, because it's not something that you do by yourself. It's something that you do with your whole team, and hopefully also with, stakeholders or partners who are responsible in driving your product to success. And the last benefit, which is actually my favorite, and is why I love this exercise so much, is because it gives the team such a boost in team building, team power, and confidence. So as I was saying, the pre-mortem, it's a really simple exercise. It only has 3 steps. Before we go into the steps, just a reminder that there is one requirement for this exercise. In order to do a pre-mortem successfully, it is really, really critical that you have a safe space with your team. Everyone who will be part of that exercise needs to feel safe. that they can raise their concerns, their fears, that they will be addressed. Yeah, if you don't have that, you do need to start with that before. But if you have that, that's awesome, and we can go straight in.
Yeah,
So as I
definitely, yeah, definitely having like a healthy environment is actually the key pillar to any kind of proper working or a productive working, and having this relationship of trust and comfort within the team and between the team and leadership, is one of the things that would enable them, I imagine, as you said, to apply this pre-mortem exercise, and not to take that from like a personal perspective, or from a pessimistic perspective, that you're not looking at the positive benefits enough, or that you're not optimistic enough about how the future might be for the company or the product. But it's an actual exercise that should be happening in order to mitigate. That's the essence of this exercise, and for this framework, that we need that to mitigate the risks that might be hurting the product development, or actually might waste the efforts of building the product and reaching to a stage where we discover that, okay, that we should have done something else, or we should have worked around it. So yeah, on point on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is all about that risk prevention.
Yeah.
So in order to run it, there are three main steps for a
Okay.
pre-mortem exercise. The
Hmm.
first step, very easy. You need to set the stage. You need to
Hmm.
make sure that you have the right people in the room. You need to make sure that everyone is clear on the scope of the initiative. You need to be clear on, you know, what markets are you launching for? What are you launching? Is it an iteration? It is a new product? On what channels is it going? What is the behavior that you're trying to influence for consumers? How will this influence, consumer behavior and the KPIs that you're trying to move? All these
Hmm.
things need to be crystal clear. You need to have also a lot of clarity on the timelines of delivery, so that you can set a date in the future to do this exercise. So I'll give you an example. We, in my team, we're working on creating product recommendations for outfits. So when you're shopping online, maybe you are buying a top to go running. We want to recommend you also the bottom and the shoes, so that you have, a really nice outfit every time you go training or running.
Hmm.
So if we say that this is going to be a Q1 commitment for next year, we can say, okay, we expect to deliver this between January and March. We're going to give ourselves some time of buffer to, monitor, see how the data performs, make sure, there's hypercare and that everything is delivered successfully. So then, maybe the 1st of May, we'll be able to see if we have succeeded or not. So as you set the scope, and as you imagine this date in the future, it's important that you bring everyone to the future with you. And you can set the scene, just asking them maybe to close their eyes, and you paint the scene a little bit of like, okay, it's 1st of May of 2024. We're in Amsterdam. It's a cloudy day. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to deliver what we set ourselves up for. And then you ask everyone to open their eyes again. And then this is where the fun part of the exercise, the meaty part, really starts, because you can start brainstorming about, what could possibly go wrong. So this brings us to the second phase. And I call the second phase inviting your friends, Negative Nancy and Positive Polly, to the party. Now, Negative Nancy and Positive Polly, they're not, friends who live around the corner that you can call in to come into the party. They are mindsets. They are hats that the team needs to wear for this exercise. And I always tell the team that Negative Nancy is like Wednesday Addams. She's very negative, obviously. She's very dark. She wears, a black veil over her head,
Yeah.
and she she thinks very negatively about everything.
She has a pet
Whereas
crow and everything.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, she's extremely negative. Positive
Yeah.
Polly, on the other side, she's the complete opposite. She's like Wednesday Addams' roommate, if you've watched the series on
Yeah.
Netflix. For her, everything is colorful, pink, rainbows, unicorns.
Yeah.
And Now, what you do throughout, the next hour or so, you time box it. You encourage the team to get into this mindset of being negative Nancy and thinking about all the possible things that could go wrong. And, it's important to allow this space to be negative because it's not often we often want to hide those risks, or we don't feel comfortable about talking about them because no one wants to be negative Nancy in the room. Nobody
Hmm.
wants to listen to these voices, but actually they might be really important because they can be overlooked. So it's
Yeah.
important that you allow that space without getting too carried away because negative Nancy can take over the party. You also don't want that.
Hmm.
So I always start with negative Nancy to, get the negatives out of the way.
Yeah.
And then we move on to positive poly. And positive poly is a lot more fun because it allows that freedom to think bigger and, dare to imagine how your product could evolve, how consumers could use it, how new technologies could evolve it. And, it I often get asked if this is a bit of a waste of time, but actually, positive poly is a very important part of this exercise as well, because it kind of seeds a little bit of ideas that you can go back throughout your discovery and
Hmm.
take those items into the backlog and say, okay, well, if the initiative is positive and everything evolves well, maybe we can look into this opportunity that we hadn't had the time to think about, maybe if we weren't dreaming that big. So once you have all the negative things that could happen and all the positive things that could happen with your product launch, you're halfway through the exercise. So as I said, don't get overwhelmed if you have a lot of negatives. It's totally fine.
Hmm.
By now, you reach the last part of the exercise, and this one is the most important. Obviously, is prioritizing all of them because you probably have a lot of them. Remember that you just gave the team free reign to brainstorm about anything that could
Hmm.
possibly go wrong. So some of these ideas might be, a little bit far-fetched or a little bit wacky. It's okay. You don't need to address them all, but you just need to allow that space for, everyone to feel comfortable and feel part of this product launch. So you can prioritize whatever you're going to address in whatever way makes most sense to you. We all know that there are different prioritization frameworks. I would say keep it very simple. Maybe you do a voting exercise, like whatever makes the most sense for you, and just remember that you will have already thought about some of these risks. And the beauty
Hmm.
of doing this exercise again with the rest of the team is to give a little bit of, space and time to all those risks that you might not have thought of. So while you might be tempted to prioritize, risks that you already knew about, maybe think about giving a little bit more time and thought to risks that you hadn't thought about. So, prioritize 3, 5, 10, whatever makes sense to you, and do the same for the positive poly thoughts for discovery. And then this is where the exercise becomes really empowering, because as you prioritize the risks that you're going to, consider in more depth, you're going to start to brainstorm about mitigation actions to prevent those risks. And the most empowering part here really is assigning accountable people to take care of that risk and that mitigation action. And I think, like what I was saying about the benefits, this is like this accountability point, having someone's name next to it really boosts everyone's confidence that we're going to be able to deliver, that someone has thought about it, that someone is responsible for it. And even for the team member who gets assigned that task, like I saw it in my team, there was a sense of pride of saying, okay, well, I'm going to be responsible for this and I'm going to make sure that we deliver appropriately. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
it's a really great exercise.
Yeah, okay. So I have a couple of questions here. First of all, from the way that you explained how the exercise would work and what's the value behind it, I would assume that this comes in an intermediate stage between discovery and delivery, right? So The first point that you said, that you have to have the stage set, so you have to have some information about, what you want to build exactly, what's the value behind it, how we're going to measure it, and so on. So that presumably is after the discovery phase is done, and maybe like actually we've already started planning a little bit on the execution, right? Does that make sense, or like it doesn't have to be that way?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the beauties of product management is that it is a little bit fluid. By the
Yeah.
book, we will have a dual track of delivery and discovery, but we know that discovery is not really linear and there's always a loop to come back to it.
Hmm.
So I would say two things here. One, you need to do it when it makes sense for you. So when you have enough information to be able to understand what could be the risks and what could be the mitigation actions. But also, the second point that I would say is that it doesn't need to be a one-off exercise. So I do this for every big initiative that we undertake. But you can do mini versions of this as you go through refinement and as you go through planning. So
Hmm.
there isn't really, a recipe to follow. It's like, I
Yeah.
don't know, making pasta, that everyone's grandma has a different recipe, even though it's
Yeah.
still pasta and
It's still
tomato
pasta.
sauce, right? There are
Yeah. Yeah.
different ways to mix it and it will
Yeah.
still be delicious.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And the second question that I had is about the positive poly. So, like, the pessimistic side definitely is there. We're trying to, imagine all the risks that could happen. But what would be the role of like the optimistic poly here? How does that contribute into the process? Because what I would imagine is that if I'm doing the optimistic thinking, I would just assume that everything is gonna go right and we're gonna deliver what we want to do. Like, it's just gonna happen, right? It's the one in the 0 to 1 equation. It's the one. It
Yeah.
happens, and that's it. Just one statement. So, like, is there more to it that actually contributes into balancing both things?
Yeah, there is. There is. So in this 0 to 1, positive poly is not one. Positive poly is 100.
Okay.
So it's not just thinking that, okay, everything will go smoothly and we will deliver within our targets. It's,
Yeah.
dare to think big. How can this evolve? How can this be amazing? How can we get more consumers to it? What would be like the ninth iteration of this product that I'm building?
Mhm.
And I think it's really important for two things. One, because it can give you a little bit of sense for discovery, because often we don't dare to dream that big, and we kind of limit ourselves to what's feasible, to what will be profitable, and what's technically viable. But daring to dream big is a very exciting exercise that really boosts that team power. So that third benefit that I mentioned, it can help a lot to gain a lot more buy-in and enthusiasm for your product launch. So, sometimes you will have the luxury to launch and build an amazing product, but some other time you might need to do a backend migration that might not be as exciting. And it's
Yeah.
still work that needs to happen. So you might still need to gain buy-in from stakeholders and partners, even from the team, to move
Mhm.
that forward. So positive poly can really help in that aspect.
Okay. And like, speaking about risk assessment generally, you said that is one of the frameworks that could be applied in risk assessment and risk analysis. But how would that compare to other frameworks, if you have used any or you have researched any others?
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact name of the risk analysis that I've used in the past, but it was basically it was a very simple one. It was just evaluating the probability of this action happening and the severity if it would happen. And I think it was a multiplication, so it's very based on statistics that you would take in first year of uni.
Hmm.
And it can also be combined with some of the prioritization methods, like the RICE prioritization method about reach and impact, and how far that action can impact the business. So yeah, at the end of the day, as I said, for the pre-mortem, you don't need to use any of these frameworks if you don't want to. Like if you have different criteria to prioritize, maybe you're prioritizing a certain market because this product, will be more valuable there, and you're not that interested in the reach that it might have. Well, fine, then you will prioritize, a different thing. But it is important that you have a criteria for that prioritization, and that the team is aware of that and agrees on it.
Mhm.
Eventually, as a product manager, you're probably going to be the one to make the call. But as I said, it's important to have the team on board with you.
Yeah, of course. Well, having a team that is aligned on the way of working and how they're thinking is definitely one of the essentials of, again, being able to reach anything. And like I like to elaborate and focus on this every time I get a chance. So maybe it's a little bit out of the scope, but a team here, when we're talking about a product team, that includes not only the product management or the product body of the team or the track, but also engineering leadership, and direct stakeholders. You could actually, in some cases, get some direct input from your users based on research, and feeding that into the whole process. So I think that, again, Postmortem might also be one of the scalable frameworks. As you said, it's flexible, it's dynamic, and you could shape it however you want and place it wherever you want to place it in the overall process, right?
Yes, absolutely. And to that point about, bringing in a wider, the broader team. So you'll obviously have, your core team of developers who work on it every day, who actually execute on the code and bring it to life. But there's a whole, stream of people who need to do things before you can even get to that point. So
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. As I said, we're working on this outfit shopping experience, and it's not just, what you see on the front end on the website.
Mhm.
It's also, the content that goes in there, the product information, like all the data science algorithms that power all of this. So yeah, for our big undertakings, we always incorporate members of these teams to make sure that we're all aligned. It also helps kind of, having this North Star vision of, okay, this is what we want to build, and it needs to look like that. And for that to happen, you guys need to do this. And it really helps with that diversity of thought as well, because, if you just do this with your development team, the things that you might come up with will be, I don't know, if the pipeline fails, if, something breaks, like the checkout breaks, or the consumer ends up on a 404. But if you incorporate, the content teams, they might say, oh, if the image isn't correctly tagged, then you might end up with the wrong image. So if we hadn't had that person in the room to, speak up about this, we would have completely disregarded it. So it really helps, with that diversity of thought, and getting like the 360 picture of everything that needs to be in place for a successful product launch.
Yeah, I think also one of the benefits of running this exercise and having these outcomes documented, and definitely also when you identify risks, you start proposing how we're going to mitigate them, or if they happen, how we are going to react with them. So I think one of the important things here is communication with leadership. That you show leadership that as a team, you've done your homework, you are ready for all different scenarios. You are not just building something because of some hypothesis that, yes, you validated, but the outcomes are a gamble anyways. And I think it constitutes trust and confidence from leadership in the team, and that would reflect on the overall environment for, again, a team or track or even a company generally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does give management so much confidence that you have done your homework, because you will have everything documented. And, as I said, nobody wants to hear the negative things. They just want to hear that you have them under control and that you've thought about them.
Yeah.
Management typically gets very excited about all the positive poly thoughts. Like, they tend to be the big thinkers and the ones who, are connecting the dots across new technologies emerging, and how they can evolve your product. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's always interesting conversations with management after doing this exercise and bringing it, throughout your product work.
Yeah, of course. So I want to like take the conversation to another perspective of this. As I asked you earlier, where would be like the optimal time or the optimal place in the process where we do such exercise or apply such framework. And even from what you described or explained, it still seems like one of the last things that you do within discovery, definitely before execution, before, because you need to be ready with all of these possible scenarios before you start execution. But how it could be used, like I'm thinking out loud here, how it could be used to validate some hypothesis that you're still starting to discover with. Um, like I'll give you an example from my own experience. So one of the products that I'm managing is a data product. And when you're managing data products, they are basically fundamental products, whether probably in a platform format, and you're serving that across the company. And such products are fundamental to the business, to the existence and scalability of the business. But when platform teams and data teams do their job right, correctly, perfect state, no one knows that they exist. They're just consuming data to build other products or to empower other experiences. And no one really sees or understands, even leadership and even top management and even other product teams, they don't like imagine the size of work and the size of effort that needs to be done, which leads in some conversations with leadership about investments, about scaling teams, about more things that you need to do, to be really challenging, because in such platforms or something like raw data, if you're trying to manage it with product management, you cannot really directly quantify your impact. You cannot easily and sometimes never able to connect that to the impact that the business side of the company is going after, like conversions or sales or acquisitions and so on. So the conversation turns into something else, like we are a fundamental platform, and if we don't do this and scale that to support capabilities, the business will be blocked to do something, or the business would be in risk of losing market share because of X or Y or Z, or maybe something bad happens and it breaks down, and now everyone knows that we exist, but because that everyone is chasing us because this thing broke. And product teams and tech teams in that situation, they only deal with the blame and they deal with the the desire to fix something very, very soon, and sometimes they fail to secure the investment and they fail to secure to the resources that they need. So like responsiveness is not at its best at this part. So how could something like this be used for hypothesis validation, to validate investments and to validate things that you're still trying to discover or still trying to plan for, even in very early discovery phases?
Yeah, this is a great question. I had never thought about it in that regard. But I think it could be because throughout this exercise you will have, everyone needed for that product success in the room. So, I am a front end product manager, but I work extensively with, people who treat the data, who treat the content that feed the experiences that we build. So, if they have the opportunity and they have the space and the forum to flag some of these risks, I think that there can be a lot of synergies and a lot of like joining forces to take this message to management to be like, hey, you want this experience on the front end for our consumers, but actually it's not just my team that needs the resources to build it. We need all these other things from the back end that you might not be seeing in order to power it on the front end for our consumers. So I definitely think that, it boosts the team power, not just of your core team and the developers and the direct designer and analysts that you might work with, but of all these satellite, teams that you work with in a matrix organization, to put forward a consistent message to management. And I think in bringing that consistency, message and that like repeated message, if they're hearing the same message that we need resources in this particular team from different teams and the dependencies that causes, it definitely can strengthen that message to management and help convincing them that, hey, we need to secure that resource there. Yeah, I'm going to bring this back to some of my backend teams because they also struggle with some of these things. I think a lot of it is, that partner building of, okay, I'm going to launch an A/B test that consumers are going to interact with, and we see it's positive and it's made X million. I think, it's only fair that we give those teams in the back end a little bit of a shout out because they are behind the scenes powering this. And without them, we wouldn't see those results. So they definitely, deserve a little bit of space there.
Yeah, that was exactly the point. Specifically, again, with some teams or products that impact there, or even with experimentation, you cannot really quantify it. So it's a qualitative hypothesis that they are looking for, and they are trying to prove, and getting this quantifiable evidence is not something that could be easily achieved. I don't know if within your experience any time before, whether when you are researching and trying to perfect this model, or even when you try to use other risk assessment models, did you ever find a way to how to quantify this risk, and how to put it in numbers, how to match it to actual impact?
Yeah. So translating risk into numbers is always a tricky one because they are always hypothetical risks, right?
Yeah.
Like it is very hard to say, there's a 25% chance that this happens, even if you have, a lot of historical data that allows you to kind of predict with some sort of, certainty what might happen. But basically, we don't have a crystal ball to, forecast the future. I wish we did. So a lot of this is the best guess, and it's the best informed guess. So I think, to do this, it's always be very curious, and try to be prepared and gather as much information as you can from as many different sources that you can, and just make sure that you have the right people in the room, because it can also be, a lot of pressure for a single person to determine all of these risks, especially if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't have the experience, you can't possibly know everything. So this is why it's important to tackle this as a group exercise and make sure that, you have the engineers, that you have the architects, that you have the data folks, that you have, anyone that might be involved with it, so that the expert in their field is in a position to give their information to allow you to put forward the best proposal for management.
Okay, great. And I think one of the main points that you mentioned at the very beginning, that it's not about actually knowing all the possible risks that could happen, but it's an empowering exercise, more into contributing to the team spirit and the team readiness to deal with anything.
Yeah, so in my team, it has helped a lot with the team spirit, just because I'm a horizontal team. We work with many different stakeholders, so there is a big amount of effort and energy that goes into aligning the different teams, gaining buy-in, especially, sometimes we have conflicting KPIs across the different teams. So there's a lot of persuasion, a lot of negotiation that needs to happen to convince people. There's a lot of, rubbing shoulders and trying to get a favor here and there. So everyone, the funny thing about this is that if you ask anyone for an opinion, most people are very willing to give their opinion. So it's kind of being invited to this forum to be like, okay, we're going to, ask you to kill our idea or to make it amazing. Everyone feels kind of, honored of being at that table. So it really does
I think for
help.
some people, they would actually be enjoying trying to kill someone else's idea.
Yeah, it's like Dragon Dance. You go there, you present your idea, and then you have all these stakeholders, kind of challenge it. Yeah. but it can be fun. I think it's important. Like, I think that challenge and that critiquing of your ideas is necessary, and it needs to happen in a healthy way. That's why you need to have that safe space. Like, the worst thing that can happen is that, someone challenges it and you get, offended,
Yeah.
or it breaks a little bit the enthusiasm to do it. So really coming from that place of, positive intent, and we're all here with the same intention of making this a success.
Yeah, and maybe by actually having like several critiques to your own the idea, the hypothesis, the plan, it would actually point out to some weak points that you already have in your hypothesis. So before proceeding with the execution, you would actually revise your hypothesis validation, your discovery process, your actual plan, your timelines, whatever it is that you weren't able to find like the proper logical answer for why it exists or why it was planned that way. So maybe that actually, like, that's the final sanity check before we actually dive into execution. And I don't think it doesn't have to be that for every risk that someone says that you need to have the answer of how you're gonna deal with it, or why that's not a risk or something like this. But at least the logical settlement between both sides that yes, we are planning to do this, and yes, the risk that you're raising is valid, but we're hoping to deal with it that way, and we have strong reasons that it might not happen that way. So at least if there's this conversation based on some evidence or based on some work that was done before, that it would be assuring enough for both sides that, okay, this is something that we can proceed with knowing this risk, and if it happens, we're going to deal with it that way. um, on the other side, if the other situation happened and someone raised the risk, and you weren't able to you were super surprised by it, you were not able to say that okay, so that might be a way to deal with that risk, or like have this conversation at all. If you felt stuck, then that would point out to a weakness in the plan, a weakness in the process that needs to be looked at again. So as you said, it's not personal, and I don't think that anything in product management is really personal, whether you're doing this on a product or someone is doing this with peer evaluations or something. Like, I'm taking this discussion to a totally new side, but I don't think anything in product is personal. It's just the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So you have to be straightforward with whatever you see, whatever you think. If your opinion is valid and you're able, again, to provide it with evidence, then okay, it should be taken into consideration, whatever the context is, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think this validation point is very critical, because, like, at least for me, I get very attached to my work, and sometimes I
Yeah.
want it to succeed, like, really so badly that I get a little bit of tunnel vision to just, deliver and go and make it happen. That sometimes, you disregard this, or you get caught up in an idea because you've been thinking about it so much that for you it's just natural. But then when you try to explain it to others and they ask you questions, maybe there you understand, okay, well, actually maybe it's not that much of a good idea, or maybe I didn't think this through enough.
Yeah.
So that validation piece with peers, and being able to build the arguments as to why you decide to go left instead of right, is definitely an important one. Yeah, I hadn't thought about this. This benefit for pre-mortem exercises, something that I am going to bring back to my team.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And also building on what you said, and I think you already said that earlier, that having peers, so you shouldn't be doing, I think, that exercise only inside your team, but having peers coming from the outside with a fresh eye, fresh perspective, they would be able to like spot any risks or any weaknesses or anything that is lacking much easier, because as you said, the more that you get involved with your work and emotionally attached to it, you start just focusing on how it could succeed and all the positive scenarios, and sometimes you're biased, sometimes you just your brain cannot go there anymore. You're just so focused on building something that you start skipping or not realizing or recognizing any risks or things, challenges that might occur. So it's really
Yeah,
important to scale and expand the scope of this exercise outside your normal scope.
yeah, to add to that, because it just came to my mind. So, indeed, we have said not to do it just with your direct team, but also involve your stakeholders and partners. I think what's also interesting, and it doesn't necessarily have to be within this exercise of the pre-mortem, but it can be a separate exercise, is finding out someone who has already done what you're trying to do. So, if you're trying to
Yeah,
launch a new product or enter a new market or whatever it is, if you're able to find someone, who's willing to spend some time with you to talk you through their successes or failures or what to watch out for, that,
yeah,
will already give you such a head start, because you won't be starting from scratch. Like, you'll already have a little bit of that experience in the room when it comes to this. So will allow, to fade away a little bit any of the fears or concerns about having issues, because you'll have a direct example to refer to. You might even have a solution of how they dealt with it. And you might not even have to come up with something new, but you can maybe, mirror that and apply it to your space.
yeah. Sharing lessons learned. So basically, finding someone that is in the post-mortem phase.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually wanted to ask you about this. So, like, we built all of this. We did the framework, we did the exercise, everything has happened, and now we've executed. And like, like everything in product management, we have to have some success criteria. So, like, that would be very controversial. Like, having success criteria for this exercise, what does that mean? Like, the risk has happened. So, like, that's how we succeeded. um,
Well,
um,
yeah,
yeah. Like,
you will
I'm
have
just kidding. I
succeeded.
know, I know you would have succeeded if you like actually mitigated something from happening. I know,
Exactly.
I'm just
Exactly.
kidding.
If it could have been worse.
Um, yeah, exactly. But like structurally, and how would you evaluate when you're at the post-mortem phase and you have already executed something, and you're assessing the performance, listing your lessons learned, all of that. How would you assess the success of this exercise and its impact on the overall, and what should be done after that?
Yeah, great questions. So I think the first thing that I would do is cross check what came out of the pre-mortem. So, those list of negatives that will become risk, and, if the accountable people actually took actions, if they were necessary, and the positive things that will become, initiatives for the discovery. So cross check that against where you are. Um, I think if you had a risk that happened and that you identified it in time and you were able to mitigate it, I think that's definitely, one of the successes for it. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest success really is that confidence in delivery.
Mhm.
Because what often happens, or what I see happen a lot with my team, is that, we often get a little bit very overwhelmed with these big challenges that we don't even know where to start. So the pre-mortem also helps a lot in breaking these things down into smaller chunks that you can, easily kind of think of. Um, so if you're able to deliver, these smaller pieces of work, I think that's also definitely a success. Just like that confidence of, okay, because we've done all the prep, we know we will figure it out, or we know we'll be able to find a person who can help us. And in terms of what would you do next, I think once you've reached the post-mortem phase, you've probably given closure to the product launch or to the project that you're working on. So then you have two ways to go, basically. Either you iterate, if you see it fit, or it ends there and you start something new that may or may not be related with what.
Yeah, and I think also from the lessons learned of like the outcomes of the uh, exercise that you executed, you would always find better ways on how to do this exercise next time with the next initiative and the next project and so on. So it's a continuous cycle of learning and improvement, as everything with product management, I would imagine. Like, maybe one last thing. So I imagine that all of what we discussed, this is something that you are doing with your team, where I could apply with my team as an individual contributor. But how would that scale with leadership roles, when you're having your first leadership role and you're managing ICs? And then how would that scale again when now you're managing managers? And how would that scale again when you are managing business units? And like as you go, how do you think such exercise would scale? Would there be differences between the different levels of you trying to apply it on much larger scope, or it would still be the same? I look at it.
So great question. I'm trying to think about, how my manager would act in this scenario. I think
Mhm.
there are ways of scaling this exercise. So scaling it with individual contributors, I think the first step there is just raising awareness about the framework. As I said at the beginning, for some reason, it's something that's not very well known. Like when I've talked about this with other friends and colleagues in product management, no one knew about it. So I'm very glad to be raising awareness about it now. So that would be step number one,
Yeah.
educate people on the benefits and encourage them to incorporate it into their toolkit. And when it comes to managers of managers, so again, raising that awareness, but I also think that the brainstorming exercise would be a lot less detailed, and it would, incorporate more areas of the business. So what tends to happen is, as you climb the corporate ladder, your work tends to be more intertwined with more departments. Um, so yeah, you would probably need either more people in the room or more knowledge about the different initiatives and what those dependencies and risks could be. But I do think that there is benefit in it, um, for both things about, identifying risks and mitigating them, dreaming big about, how different initiatives can evolve, and also about that team power, especially as you go up the ladder sometimes. um, Maybe there are more misalignments or just a little bit more synergies that need to be created. So I think this exercise can help on that front.
Okay, so my final question here would be around stakeholders that we're doing these exercises with. And it's very common that within anything that you're doing in product, you would always get stakeholders that are not really convinced yet with something that you're presenting, whether it's a new hypothesis, prioritization, something like this. But within that exercise, um, have you ever faced, or have you ever dealt with stakeholders that are not convinced that some of the risks that are presented are actually risks? And would there be a need to, again, go through the validation cycle of validating that this is an actual existing risk somehow, whether it's quantifiable or not, but like validating the risk itself? And I know at the beginning you said that this should be like an exercise that it shouldn't take too long because we don't want to dwell in the pessimistic side of the project. But um, like, have you ever faced the need, or do you think that there is always a need to validate the risks, and how to convince stakeholders that are not even convinced that maybe some risks are actually risks?
Yeah. So I have been in the situation where some stakeholders haven't believed that those risks were actual risks. And it's in those situations, I find it funny because these stakeholders, it was risks that were in their control. So we had to kind of convince them that, hey, maybe you should check your algorithms, or maybe you should check your work, because what I'm seeing here
Yeah.
on the other side, is happening much more often than you promised me.
So they
So
start getting very defensive about it. Yeah.
well, I got to say that we have a really good team spirit, and no one has ever got, like very defensive. It's more of like, okay, let me double check, and there is, a little bit of concern of like, oh, it was my work. Let me double check it, because we all take pride in our work.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a lot harder to convince stakeholders of risks that are things that are within their control than to convince them about things that are not in their control.
Of
I
course.
think it boils down to also an understanding of it. If my developer tells me that there is a risk that a pipeline might fail, I might trust him more if I don't understand, how that pipeline works, just because, I don't have many more options and I just need to trust him because it is his work, than if he tells me that, something that I need to do is a risk. So yeah, definitely been in that situation. When it comes to convincing them, like with anything, data always speaks heavily the truth. There's always an interpretation to data, but if you have good analytics in place and you're able to see historical data of an error that happened or something that failed, it's going to be easier for you to make a stronger case to encourage that action, to increase those checks for that risk. Yeah, but again, I think that safe space is very important, because if you have the safe space to be able to say, hey, I think this is more of a risk than what you're thinking, it's going to be a much more fruitful conversation than if you are slightly, concerned of how they will react. Like, you don't want to have to be worrying about all this. You want to be able to, get to the point and get work done.
Yeah, so coming back at the beginning of this discussion, like the prerequisites that you need to have is that you actually need to invest in the relationships in your scope with the stakeholders within the team first, before being able to run a productive and effective pre-mortem exercise. And like, maybe if you didn't invest that much in these relationships, that might have negative effects actually, and more destructive effects of running such an exercise. So like, you always need to make sure that you're investing proper time and effort into building these relationships and trust levels. Well, that was an amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Alba, for joining us and for sharing all of these insights and experiences about such an untapped topic in product management. Thank you so much also our viewers for joining us here. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow the Product Live on LinkedIn and Instagram, and stay tuned to the next episode in the Product Live.